Welcome, everybody. We are here for our first series, our first recording of our season 2 of Do the Work webcast. And I'm your host, Francesca Warren, owner of the Educators Room. And this is a series where we really examine topics in education that aren't usually talked about. So, this is really important because I have felt, and so many of our writers and so many of our readers have said, you know what, the things that are happening in my school or in my district or across the country are kind of just trickled about. It's not really
Yeah.
talked about in an authentic way. And so today we're going to talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, Black women in education. And we have our guest today, Dr. Rolandria Justice Imanuga. Did I say your name right?
Yep. Imanuga. That's it.
Imanuga, I did
That's
it.
it.
So before we start, give everybody a little bit of your background.
Okay. So I always hate this question, Fran, because I'm an army brat and I never know where I'm supposed to start. Um, so let me just say that I am a Virgo. I like long walks on the beach. No, I'm just kidding. I don't really. No, so my name is Rolandria Justice Manuga. I am a 20-year teacher. I started teaching in Newark, New Jersey, through a program called Teach for America. I wasn't sure that I wanted to be in education. And so getting the opportunity to go to Newark and teach helped me to see that this was where I needed to be. So I taught for about 5 years before getting into administration. I was a dean of school culture in Brooklyn. I was an AP at a school in Harlem, and then eventually went to Massachusetts, where I became a principal of a founding charter school in New Bedford, Massachusetts. Um, and from there, when I started to have my children, my husband and I moved back to New Jersey, and I got into consulting, where I would have more time to, have more flexibility with them. And recently, in May, graduated with my doctorate at Georgia State University. Which is where we met.
Yeah. And this is good. A lot of times, and first off, people are streaming. So guys, if you're here, check in, tell us where you're from, tell us what you want us to, what you want to hear about today. But it's really important as we talk about, Black women in education and leadership specifically.
Yeah.
All of your experiences seem to have they built
Yeah.
tiny bit by tiny bit by tiny bit. And I think that that is really important in this conversation because some people will hear it and say, "Oh, she did that program. She's just going to talk about." No, this is like you have operated and worked in schools that, for all accounts, have probably been very good learning environments for you as an
Absolutely.
educator. Um, so as we talk about in this conversation, and one of the things that somebody just inboxed me and said, "Oh my God, I can't believe you're going live. What are y'all talking about?" One of the things that I always like to ask our guests when we go on here, and why, like when you got into education, what kept you going? Like what was it that you said? Because you could have left after 2 years.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So what kept you here?
I realized, well, first of all, I graduated from Duke, and I went to Duke thinking that I wanted to be a pediatrician. So I was like, I'm going to go to Duke. They have one of the best med schools in the country. And I took an organic chemistry class, and I was like, nah, this ain't for me. I'll help kids another way. And so I knew in my heart that I wanted to help kids, and found teaching and realized that I love teaching. I love being in schools with kids. I love that um, those interactions that you got with them. I loved walking away knowing that I was helping them in a way that I wanted to get help when I was a kid at times. Um, and so that became my why. But why I got into leadership, it was because as I was a teacher, I realized that there was so much that I was doing for my kids in my classroom, but that did not impact the larger school system. And I realized how important leadership is to actually being able to have classrooms that look the way that they should.
Mm. That's and that's interesting because a lot of people go into leadership sometimes and they think that it's about being the boss.
Oh
I'm going to be the
no.
boss. I'm going to tell people what to do. Teachers are going to look to me for advice. And we know this. We've been in education that there is definitely an element of that there.
Yeah.
But there's this other element where you spoke about a little bit on finding that purpose and
Yeah.
figuring out how to help kids. So, what as a black female leader, and tell me, I don't want to assume the type of environment you've worked at,
Yeah.
but what did you envision the role that you would play? And I don't even want to say leveling the playing field, but addressing inequities in education or just helping kids. What role did you envision?
Yeah. So first, let me say that one of the things that made me investigate the research of Black women who are school leaders and mothers is because as a Black woman growing up and going to school in America, I had had my own experiences with gendered racism, right? Where I had my own experiences of feeling like I don't belong here, right? That no one cares if I'm here or not, or that you're so hypersensitive of not seeing any images that look like you. Because part of my grown up experience, I went to high school in Manhattan, Kansas.
Mm,
And so having those experiences helped me to realize that if I were having those feelings, I know that other kids are having those same experiences. And so a lot of the schools I've worked in have been schools in which Black children are the highest minority present,
mm,
and low income, and all of the marginalizations that we know that our kids and families often go through. Um, and that was a huge part of why I worked in those environments, was because I needed to be that model that I felt like I wanted to see when I was in
mm,
school.
mm,
And I think that that's one of the things that Black women as school leaders and also as mothers bring to schools, is that there's this idea that we bring this professional authenticity. And that's what I just describe it as in my research. This idea of you're still able to do the job successfully of teaching and learning and leading, but you're doing it while still being you.
mm,
And the power that that has for our children and our families that look to us and see that we look like them, and we also have this leadership position,
mhm,
and we also have this professionalism that says to them, ooh, not only does she look like me, but she also sees me in a way that I haven't always felt in
mm,
my school environments. Um, and that was a huge part of why I have gotten into school leadership, why I've
mm.
stayed in school leadership, and why I researched this, because it was important to me to elevate these voices.
Yeah, yeah. And elevation, there was a time I remember growing up that my principal, I never saw a person of color be a principal, be a leader in a school, right? So that was something that as I got into education, it was something that I saw more and more of.
Yeah.
But there is this notion that there are not these nuances when you're leading that cause for, I don't want to say different interactions, but they're important to call out. And so as you talk about your research, um, what were some of the things that you found that you were like, oh my God, like I didn't really know this to be true? Was there
Yeah.
anything in there?
I don't know that it was that surprising to me, but my research was a hermeneutic phenomenology,
Mm,
and what that means is I chose this topic because I have experience in the phenomenon as well. So I
mm,
interviewed 4 Black women who are school leaders and mothers, because I am a Black woman who is a school leader and mother. Um, and when I was going through my interviews, with each woman, I interviewed them 3 different times.
mm,
And each time we were talking about either them as a mother, them as a school leader, them as a Black woman who grew up going to schools in America. Um, and one of the things that really struck me was how deeply committed they are to the families that we're working with,
Mhm.
But also too, the stress and the toll that being a Black woman who is a school leader to Black children and a mother to Black children, the toll that it takes on them.
Mm.
And that wasn't surprising because I had felt the same thing.
Yeah.
But what was surprising was the impact that it had on their feelings about themselves. Meaning, I'm having interviews with women who are telling me how the parents feel great when they are with them. They feel
Mm.
better talking to them. How the kids say the same things to them, the kids at the school and their kids at home. And yet, these same women are also saying to me, but Rolandria, I also don't feel as if when I'm doing well at school, I feel like I'm being a bad mom.
Mm.
When I'm doing well at home, I feel like I'm being a bad leader. And so I'm looking at these powerhouse women and I'm hearing them say things like, I don't feel like I'm doing enough. And I was also feeling the same thing. And the impact of that was such a huge eye opener for me because what it did was it allowed me to realize how important it was that I talk about my research
Yeah.
because we have these powerhouse women who are feeling so low that they're also feeling like I'm education might not be for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And let's unpack that a little bit because this is a side of leadership that people really don't talk about, especially for women and then for Black women, around the idea of feeling like failures at work when you're giving your at home, you feeling like a failure at home when you're giving your all at work.
Yep.
That's something that's not really talked about. Um, people will say things like, wow, you're doing such a great job as a principal. But when you go home, you're going home, your kids are asleep, you don't get time to play with them.
Yep.
How did the leaders that you spoke with, how were they balancing that? Like, how did that work?
If I'm being 100% honest with you, they didn't feel like they were doing a very good job balancing
Mm,
it.
mm,
And it was astonishing because again during our conversations I'm asking them to unpack a lot of things. I'm asking them to talk to me about why you're feeling like this,
mm,
and all they were being a lot of what they were able to bring up were the things that weren't going well,
mm,
right? Either at home or at school. And when we would try and talk about, well, what is going well, they would also be able to bring up a lot of things that way too, but they weren't paying as much attention to that as they were to the things that aren't going well.
mm. And
Right?
keep going because there's something in there.
Well, and what I saw that doing to them was they didn't have anything to give because they weren't able to pour into themselves and others around them weren't pouring into them.
Wow. What is that pouring? Was there any conversation on what that pouring in looks like? Because we do a conference on self care every year, and for some people, self care for so long was talked about as you know going and getting your nails done or your hair done.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
did
yeah,
they
yeah.
have like what were the specifics around some of the things that they talked about that would have helped in that?
They didn't. But one of the things that we did do, and this is a part of the reason why I did this research, is because one of the things that almost every single one of them said at some point during our 3 interviews was, "This feels like therapy to me." And it
Mm,
was because one, I was asking them to come up with what do they feel like it's not going well, but also let's focus on what is going well. And
mhm,
then a lot of what I was able to do was to point out what, and I was not trying to do this on purpose, right? Because
yeah.
this is research, right? But I think that in the questions that I was asking them and me asking them to take time to say, how are you? What does this feel
Mm,
like for you? What
yeah.
does the experience of being a Black woman leading Black children feel like for you? I think
Mm,
that having that opportunity to not only be able to talk about what they were experiencing, but do it in a place that felt safe
yeah.
and do it with someone who felt like they were being seen and heard was so opening for them to realize how important it was that they take care of themselves.
Mm.
if that makes sense. I think that was one thing that came up pretty consistently. Whoa, this feels like therapy. You know, a couple of women cried on some of our calls, and it's because they were actually being listened to and felt heard and felt seen and felt like, wow, you're right. I do bring a lot to the table. Yeah, you do.
Yeah. Yeah. And does that have anything to do with imposter syndrome? Like leadership?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What
Absolutely.
is it?
This idea that I don't belong here, right? Like this idea that I am the one who sticks out, right? And like this negative self-talk that we have been conditioned, right, to embrace. I mean, it's always there. Even as someone who just got her doctorate, I still would have those moments where I'm like, what? Am I really here?
Yes.
At any point, they're going to realize that I'm the imposter and kick me out, right? And like having to fight that and question myself and say, well, Andrea, why are you feeling that right now? Why is that coming up for you right now? And what are you going to do about it? Instead of just accepting that and just saying, yep, you're right.
Yeah.
I'm not even going to do that assignment because I'm probably going to fail it anyway. No. Why is that coming up for you? Right. And being willing to question myself and say, well, Andrea, it reminds me a lot of like, you know, Insecure with Issa, right? When she's like in the bathroom or in the mirror, she's talking to herself, right? But it's that idea of like you really having to question those negative thoughts that come automatically, you know, until they start to not come as quickly and as often as they do for a lot of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I guess this is something that isn't talked about, or I'm sure it has, but maybe not in this form, is as we're training the next generation of leaders and as women more and more get into these roles and as black women more and more get into these roles, what were some of the things, did this come out, or do you have any thoughts about or any research around what would have helped them prepare for that better? I feel like as a leader, sometimes women are told to lead and just nothing else matters, right? You just lead and you just keep going and you just keep going, and eventually everything will work itself out. But in reality, that's not true.
No.
What were some of the things that you found or that you through research where you can say, you know what, they really need to experience this or go through this to be prepared for this work?
So one thing I would say, and I know that this has happened to not just me, but to a lot of Black women who try and get into leadership, we are automatically steered towards culture and behavior, right? And like dealing with the kids and the families, right? Because it's almost like that mindset that the NFL had about Black quarterbacks, right? That like, oh, that's not something that they can handle. And I think that that's one of the things is as Black women and as leaders, like we have to have that time and that experience to deal with all of the aspects of being an effective school leader, not just the culture and the behavior, but also the academics, the operations, the budget, right? The political aspects of the work, the meet and greets, a lot of those things. And those a lot of times are the areas that if we don't have experience in, then we take ourselves out of the conversation for leadership. Oh, I can't apply for that. I'm not ready for that yet. I don't even know how to do this, right? And this idea that you also have to go and find those opportunities. How are you looking for those opportunities? How are you asking for opportunities to coach some of your colleagues so that you get into the habit of coaching others? So I would definitely say that that's one thing. And then another thing I would say is mentorship is a huge aspect, right? Because once you get into that leadership position, when I was a school principal, I didn't have my first year, I didn't have other Black women or other women that in leadership that I could go to and say, hey, how are you dealing with this? How are you balancing X and Y? What do you do when this happens?
Yeah.
And it wasn't until my second year of leadership, when I was in a fellowship with Boston College, where I had access to principals who were in traditional public schools, Catholic schools, and
Yeah.
also charter schools, that I then had other women that I could say, listen, can you jump on the phone real quick? Because I don't know what to do here. And
Yeah.
instead of allowing those situations, those problems to fester into my
Mm.
head to the point where I said, well, damn, I can't do this.
Yeah.
This ain't for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
So I would say
That's
mentorship is another aspect.
mentorship, coaching. And you brought somebody said in the comments, I can't see who this is, but I'm going to read what the comment said. She said most black women are steered towards struggling schools and pushed to fix those schools.
Yep.
And that is something that is not talked about, because what did you find about that? Like, is that true in your research, that you found that this is where a lot of black women leaders are being steered to, unless?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The research absolutely shows that. Um, One of the things that Dr. Susan Horsford Douglas talks about is this idea of Black women being showing bridge leadership. So this
Mm.
idea that we often connect the schools and the teachers and the staff with the families, right? So
Mm.
this idea that we often, a lot of times, have to be that bridge. And when you think about a lot of times the schools that are in those low income struggling areas are the schools that they, the higher ups feel like need that Black woman leadership to bridge the school and the family and the community. But doing that without all of the support that comes
Mm.
with it, then how am I supposed to, make magic happen over here?
Yeah, yeah, that's really important. And that's really interesting, because that's something that it's not talked about,
Mm-hmm.
and people don't, it, I don't know if people are ready for that,
Yeah,
right? And I don't
yeah.
know if people are ready to say, why are they being dropped in these schools? And is it because they feel like they're the only ones who can improve them? Or so it's just a lot of questions around that.
Well,
What? Go ahead.
and for one of the things I would say too is, even for when you look at or think about whose voices are prevalent when it comes to how to fix our schools, right? You don't see the voices of these Black women who have been put into these really tough situations and have had to make magic happen out of nothing. You don't see and hear their voices a lot, right? You
Mm.
see and hear voices of white and male perspective. And
Mm.
so how are we even lifting up the voices of those women who have been in those tough situations? How did they even get that small amount of growth that in the previous years no one was getting any growth in those schools, right? But
Mhm.
we overlook that, and we look for voices that don't look like them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's one of those things that I think that this is the reality of leadership. Leadership is not just you getting a school and you leading it. There are nuances to being a leader. There are nuances to being
Absolutely.
and we have to talk about them. So as we go through, you talked about some of the research. You talked about some of the things that you found. Now, as you were doing this research around Black women leaders, what were some of the things that came up that you didn't have time to research, but you were like, oh, I wish I could write? I don't know if you ever thought about this, writing
Yeah.
another paper.
Yeah. So Dr. Philomena Essed talks about this idea of everyday racism, and she wrote a book about it.
Mm.
And I would have loved to dig even deeper into the idea of how everyday racism impacts not only Black women as school leaders and mothers, but also how does it impact the actual school environment. So I'll
Mm-hmm.
give you an example. One of my participants told me a story of one of her high school students who came to her. He was a young man, and he was really upset. And when she asked him what happened, she said that he had been in a classroom with one of his teachers, a white female teacher, and he had said something that wasn't grammatically correct. And
Mm-hmm.
she had said something in front of the whole class that kind of embarrassed him. Why are you talking like that kind of comment? And he was
Mm-hmm.
really frustrated by that. And so he went to my participant and told her that. And she said to him, I need you to tell this teacher that because we were brought over here and weren't taught the language, we had to teach it to ourselves, which means that sometimes we're not going to use the grammatically correct way. And in that moment, she was not only advocating for him, but she was getting him to advocate for himself to say, not only did I not like what you said, but here's also some history to give you some context as to why what you said was not okay. And so I think about her advocating for him in a way that it's not guaranteed that any other leader would have been able to have that conversation with him in a way that made him walk away feeling empowered.
Yeah.
Like she did.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And I feel like there's so much more there. I just wrote down that name of that researcher. Tell us again for those who are watching, what's the name of the researcher?
Oh, that was Dr. Philomena Essed, Essed.
And that is, the notion of everyday racism and what does that look like in a school building. As your research, we touched on this briefly, but I want to get to the other questions so I don't hog you, even though I can talk to you all day. What were some of the barriers to leadership that you found?
Whew.
What were some of those barriers? And I'm
okay. So we already talked about a couple of them.
Yeah.
One is the idea that Black women being steered towards culture and not towards either the coaching aspect of school leadership or the academic aspect of leadership, and more of the kind of steered towards more of the operational versus the strategic, bigger picture thinking that school leaders need to have. I think that another barrier is not seeing enough people that look like you in the position. So you automatically start to believe that that's not a position for you. Right. And so having to undo that kind of mindset as well. I would also say too that finances are a part of it, right? So in order for me to be a principal, I had to not only have my bachelor's and get my certificate for teaching, I had to get my master's in educational leadership, which meant going back to school, getting the certification for that, right? So like there's also that financial barrier that can also be there. If I've been a teacher for a set number of years and I don't have the finances to go back to school and get additional training and all of that, then how am I going to get into that position? And then what else would I say? I think also too, and we talked a little bit about this, that particularly for Black women who are moms, right? That balance. How do I find the balance of being a school leader and knowing that that's going to be at least 12-hour days that I'm doing every day, but I also have 2 or 3 kids that I have to take care of myself who don't go to my school. And right. So like all of those become issues that make it so much harder to say, yep, I'm going to get into school leadership and follow through with that path.
Yeah. And you brought up a really good point around, because there's been this whole conversation about student loan debt. And some of it was forgiven by President Biden, but there's been huge conversation about teachers who have accumulated so much debt, leaders, and how it is a barrier. And I have my own thoughts about it because we're in a teacher shortage.
Yep.
For a variety of reasons. And thinking about the idea that if you're an educator, would it be a way for us to attract more talent, especially to leadership and to just teaching, to not have these huge student loan debt? So what are your thoughts on that? Does any of that like coincide with what you researched and found?
So not necessarily directly in relation to my research, but it is definitely an issue, right? Because one of the things we also know is that women, and then particularly Black women, make much less money than white men do, right? And so that becomes another, just a financial barrier towards getting into any kind of leadership position. And so if you also too know that going into schools and school leadership, that the amount of money that you're going to be making is not going to be able to cover the cost of inflation and all of those things. And why would I go into that when I can find something else? So no, I definitely think that all of that is a direct correlation to the lack of Black women leaders that we see in our schools.
Yeah, yeah. And
Absolutely.
this is really interesting because as we've talked about this and as we keep going about this, there will this talk will hopefully spearhead more conversations about just some other of the nuances that we're seeing in leadership that people are not talking about. And I suspect that because we're seeing teachers quitting and principals quitting, that there will be even more conversations about this. But just what do we do now? Like from the policy level, what do you think could be done to really address some of the to address some of the issues you raised in your research?
I mean, so definitely more mentorship, particularly for Black women. I think one of the things that I wanted to do in my research that I wasn't able to do was a focus group where I wanted to get all of my participants together, because I think that there is something that is so powerful, and the research shows that there's something so powerful about getting Black women together in a group. And so I don't know whether there's policy ways that we can incorporate more of that into our policies to attract more Black women, and I think and men. You know, affinity groups are important anywhere, right?
Yeah.
But I would also say too that um, again, getting the voices of Black women school leaders out there even more to show that, yes, we are there. Yes, we are being successful. And that, yes, there are spaces for more Black women to join. And I don't think that, honestly, that our schools are going to get any better until
Mm,
more Black women voices are a part of our conversations around schools. I
mm,
mean, think about it right now. Like you have groups of people who are trying to literally change history,
mm.
right? Like literally change
Yes,
history.
yes.
And so if we don't speak up, and one of the things I wrote about in my research was a young girl in Utah, 10-year-old little girl, Izzy Tishner, who was Black and has autism and was being bullied at school, not only by the kids but by the adults as well, right? So last September, her mom
Hmm.
and dad saw her, you know, trying to take a Febreze bottle to school. And they're like, babe, what are you doing? Why are you trying to take a Febreze bottle to school? And she said it was because the kids in her class said that she stank. And the
Mm,
teacher made her sit away from everyone else.
mm.
So I bring her up because that baby then went home one day and killed herself
I
as
remember
a
this.
result of not feeling accepted, as a result of not feeling like this was a space where she could be safe. And
Hmm.
had they had, more Black women school leaders, I just have to feel that would not have, something like that would not have happened, because she would have had someone to go to. Her parents would have had someone to go to at the school that listened to them versus what their principal did, which is to just push them off to someone else until the baby felt
Mm.
like she had nowhere else to go. Right. So, like, sorry, we got kids.
No, no, it's okay. And I think so. And this is one of the things, this is one of the nuances of
Yep.
education. And this is the point of having these conversations that are very nuanced. And it's one of these things where this is happening across the country and no one's talking about it except for a
Absolutely.
byline in a newspaper.
Absolutely.
And then they're saying, and then it's like, oh, what could we have done? There are ways that we know work.
Yep.
Now let's talk about, as we're going into this, we're saying post COVID, but it's really not post COVID. But we're going into this age in education where people are hyper focused on what is happening in schools, policy
Yeah.
level. What are some of the things, as someone who's going to watch this, people are going to watch this and they're going to say, wow, how do I make change? What can I do? What what would be some of your advice?
So one first thing I would say is to get involved in your local school, not only your child's local school, but then the local school district. Whether
Yeah,
that means, especially right now, a lot of school districts are still doing their meetings online. So being updated on what is going on in my child's school, in my child's district. Um, and one of the things that, Fran, I love about you is that when we first met in the summer of 2019, you were telling us about all the things that were going on in the school district in a way that it was a letting me know what was happening. But then you didn't just stop there. You
yeah,
then went and ran for school board,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
so now that school board has someone on the school board who not only is a mother to Black children, but is also a school leader and a school teacher and has that perspective. And so you can advocate for kids in a way that it's not just about talking about it, it's about you backing it up. And so that would be one of the first things I would say. How are you actually being involved in what's going on at the
mm,
local school board and local school district level? Um,
yeah,
is one of the first things I would say. And then the second thing that I would say, and one of the things I have started to do even more, is having open and honest conversations, particularly with my child's teacher, about race and about what I expect for them, how I expect them to behave, treat him. Just
yeah,
knowing that the school to prison pipeline is not made up, right? And
yeah,
that there are a lot of situations where perceptions of our kids and our families are allowed to be just the end all be all versus questioning some of these assumptions. And so
yeah,
one of the things that I have started to do is to have more of those conversations with my child's teacher.
yeah,
Yeah, I want to make sure that you know that he has a mom who is advocating for him. And that does not
yeah,
mean that I believe that everything that he does is perfect,
yeah,
but you're not going to just call me and send him out of school. Like that's just not going to happen, right? Because
mm,
I know, I know the rules. I know that the ins and outs in a way that makes a lot of interactions with my classes, my child's teacher, um, be a lot more, I think, on the up and up in
yeah,
a way that once you've been in a school building, you kind of know some of the ins and outs in a way that's helpful.
yeah,
And so I think that that's one of the things I've also started to do is instead of being more concerned about what they might think about me, I'm
yeah,
just putting it out there. Like, no, yeah, we're not doing that. Not
yeah,
with mine.
yeah. And it's one of these things where, as you're going through and as you're thinking about well, this is just the question: what's next for your research? As we've talked about this, what's next for the research, and what are some of the action items that you've already started to kind of bring solutions to these issues that you raised in your research?
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm doing as far as connecting my research with my 20 years of experience in K-12 and K-12 schools is I am starting my own daycare.
Mm,
So what I am trying to do with that is take all my experience with K-12 and being a school leader, building teams of teachers, dealing with parents, actually helping kids to grow and to develop and to walk away feeling like I can do this on my own.
mm,
Um, I'm going to take all of that and I'm going to start my own daycare where I'm going to be able to support not only kids from 6 weeks to 12 years old, but also their families, right? Because one of the things I
yeah,
recognize is that my son, his speech delay was flagged for me at 18 months by his daycare. And so,
Mm.
even though up to that point I had been in education for 10 years, I had my son and I saw him every day and did not recognize that he had a potential speech delay. And it
Wow.
wasn't until his daycare said to me, "Hey, we just want to make sure that you know that this is something that we've seen." Then I was able to get him into speech. He was in speech for 3, 4 years and was able to go into kindergarten with appropriate vocabulary, right? With perfect articulation, in a way that if I hadn't had that flag for me, because my son is a bigger boy, right?
Hmm.
Because he's also a Black man, if he had not been able to articulate himself, I could just imagine what that could have turned into.
Yeah.
Right. But
Yeah.
because his daycare flagged it for me so early, I was able to get him the support he needed. And that's the kind of support I want to be able to give our families. Right. Not
Wow.
only does your kid have a safe place to come and grow and develop, where you know that they're going to be loved, where you know that they're going to get, an education, where you know they're going to have fun, but also too, mom, let me flag for you. Let me flag this for you. Or hey, mom, have you
Hmm.
thought about trying this?
Yeah.
Or hey, parents, we're doing a workshop where we're going to talk to you about some of the things that we're doing at school so that you can do them at home. Right? So
Yeah.
like making that actual connection and doing that bridge leadership that came up in my research.
Yeah. And that's really interesting because a lot of people discount how important daycare, pre-K, early education is for
Absolutely.
students and their academic life. So that
Absolutely.
is important.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mm.
100%. 100. And I know that you've heard and read the research that talks about the 3 million word gap, right? This
Yes.
idea that
Yes.
our children, Black children, children of color who are living in poverty are going into kindergarten and first grade behind some of their peers because their peers have had exposure to so many more words, so many more vocabulary, so
Hmm.
many more critical thinking experiences that our kids have not had.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
so they're going in at a deficit. And
Yeah.
so how are we addressing that in a way that still recognizes that parents are busy, and parents are not educators and have not gone through all of the steps and the learning that we've gone through. And so how can we make this so that it is easy to implement, but also effective, and like
Yeah.
you see the actual results.
Absolutely. This is wonderful. As people are watching this, this gives a lot of the getting research. And what I'm probably going to do, I didn't think about this, is getting a one pager and putting some of this research on for people if they want to follow up. So we'll have someone from the team reach out for that. Somebody
Okay.
just said Chicago has free pre-K for all students. Most of the seats are empty in our low income neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That is, yeah,
but
and that's a,
but it,
go
it
ahead.
makes sense though. Like I think
Yeah.
about it, my husband is not in education, right? and,
Yeah.
and he's the oldest boy, um but his family's Nigerian. And so I
Okay.
say that to say that it wasn't an expectation for him as the oldest boy that he was taking care of the youngers. So I'm saying that to say he doesn't have or didn't have a lot of the experience of actually having to take care of younger kids and seeing how they develop and all of that, right? And
Right.
so there were times when our kids were growing where he would say something or get upset and frustrated. And I'm like, babe, he doesn't know what you mean when you say relax. That is
Mm,
that's a context that he doesn't have any context for that. So what you need to tell him to do is to Brandon, stop running, stop screaming, sit down, right? But
mm,
that is something that I know not only as an educator, but also because I focused on developmental psychology when I was in college. And so I
yeah.
got to learn, how do people develop? How do they grow? What are the stages of learning, right? In a way that I say that to say that a lot of parents don't understand that when kids are this young, they're still growing, they're
Yeah.
still learning. even though they may not be able to communicate it to you, but they are communicating it. And how are you taking advantage of that in a way that's still allowing them to be developmentally appropriate, but also growing and developing and growing their brain, as we say in education.
Mm. I love that. This is great. This is such needed conversations that I don't want people to get lost in this and say, because there are going to be people who watch this and say, this isn't just for Black women. We understand this. The Do the
Oh,
Work
absolutely.
series, the Do the Work series is about capturing nuances in education. So as we continue to roll out these titles and these topics, they are going to be some where you're like, I don't know if I identify with that, but this is great research and this is real. And I think
Yeah,
that's something that I want to make sure that people, as they're watching this and as they see this and as they're thinking about this, that they say, these are real concerns. And if you speak to any woman of color in leadership, they're going to tell you right now, absolutely. Yes. They're going to agree with
yeah.
absolutely. And they're going to say, I experienced that. Now, how can people find you? They're going to watch this and they're going to say, this was great. How can I find her?
So I am on Facebook as Rolandria Justice and Manuga. I am also on Instagram as Queen Just underscore Ice. And then I also have, I've started recently my own consulting company. And so
Mm,
that is at justiceconsultinggroup.com. Um, and yeah, I'm out there. I promise.
listen, and continuing to have these conversations because this is our first Do the Work series, and we have started to every month featuring various authors, researchers. Let me say that researchers and their work. So, Dr. Justice Eminuga, I don't want to say your name wrong.
You
Please
got it. You
forgive
got
me.
it.
We will be publishing some of her work this upcoming week, and then we have some several other pieces that as they go through the editing process they'll be out. But our goal is to bring to light researchers in education who are
Yeah,
doing cutting edge research and are talking about things that we feel like should be talked about. It's 2022, and there's no reason for us to continue to have these conversations behind closed doors. So we thank you.
absolutely.
Is there any, if you had to have just a final thought, what would it be?
I think my final thought would be this. Oftentimes, as school leaders, we believe that you're dealing directly with the children. And
Mm,
that's not the type of thinking that you need as a school leader. As a school leader, you are dealing with the adults and getting them
mm,
to the point where they feel successful and they feel like they are capable of implementing the vision that you have as a school leader. Um, and so I say that to say that what I've realized and why I am putting myself out there more is because what I realize is that I need to be able to speak for other women, Black school
mhm,
leaders, Black mothers, women of color who are feeling that same level of, is this for me? Am I in the right role? Am I doing enough? Am I doing it
mhm,
right? Um, Part of your job is getting the other adults to get on board with you. And
yeah.
so, one, taking care of yourself is important for that. Um, but then B, just know that that is your role, and you're built for this. That's one of the things I said to you early on our call, friend. But you're built for this.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that that mental and that physical and that mindset shift that you're talking about is something that has not been explored in depth. Like it's starting to
Mm-hmm.
be, but this
Yeah,
idea of this is Sunday night and in 12 hours plus, people will be going back to school and they'll be going into this. And if they can take one thing from this conversation, we've done our job. So, guys, as you're watching this and you're saying, I love this, I love how we're getting real about topics, pop us in a comment. Actually, we're going to leave our email in the comments so that you can tell us who are some up and coming researchers that you know that you're saying we need to talk about their research. This is good
yeah,
stuff. And we thank you for your time. So
of
it's
course.
Sunday. I don't know about you, but I have to get kids ready for school.
Oh,
So thank you,
absolutely.
everybody. And please visit www.theeducatorsroom.com. And we thank you guys for your time.
Thank you so much, Fran. I appreciate it.
Thank you.